All right, it is 6:01. I'm going to wait until 6:03 for any last minute attendees. I would like to thank everybody that is already here for your patience. I always have people that are having some technical difficulties or something, so I like to give just a minute or so extra so that they aren't going to miss too terribly much. But we will be getting started very shortly. Thank you for your patience. All right, I think now is an excellent time for us to get started. I would like to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Bethany Pearson. I am the program and volunteer coordinator for the Everett Rail Marshfield Public Library in Marshfield, Wisconsin. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us for a fun program this evening. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm not going to waste too much more time. And I am just going to now introduce and welcome Shitan to join us this evening with her fantastic program. Thank you so much.
Hi, guys. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight for my presentation. I am very passionate about the paranormal history and the history of the Great Lakes in general. It's become a fascination of mine, and I've spent a lot of time doing research into various aspects of the maritime history of the Great Lakes. Now, before I go any further, I need to pay my due diligence, and tomorrow is November 10th, and that date might not mean a whole lot to a whole lot of people, but that is the date that the Edmund Fitzgerald sank and took 29 lives with it. But it has since become a day of honor and remembrance for all lives lost to maritime tragedies, whether it's shipwrecks, whether it's drowning. If a life was lost at sea, November 10th is the day that we typically honor them. So I would like to do just a little pause of silence in remembrance of all lives that are lost. Now, tonight's presentation is the Russ Simmons, the Christmas tree ship, but also the other ghost ships of the Great Lakes. And people often ask me, what is a ghost ship? And I will also talk about hoodoo ships for a little bit, because while they're not similar, they are both parts of maritime history in the Great Lakes. And the ghost ship is a ship that we know has wrecked, usually has been lost during a gale force storm, and took many lives with it. And the ship and the bodies have possibly never been recovered. Now, the reason it has become a ghost ship is other ships, other crews on the ships, other passengers on the ships occasionally see these boats sailing on the Great Lakes. Now, the difference between a ghost ship And a hoodoo ship is a ship that, for whatever reason, is still sailing the waters way past its prime, but it has had so many tragedies and odd occurrences happening with it that a lot of old sailors, deem it a hoodoo ship or a black cat ship, and say that tragedy befalls all who sail on them. And so we have two different categories of mystery ships here on the Great Lakes. We have the ghost ships and we have the hoodoo ships. And so the first one I'm going to talk about falls into the category of the ghost ships, and it is the Ross Simmons, the Christmas tree ship. Now, the basic facts on the Ross Simmons is she was a three-masted schooner, wooden ship. She was 123 feet long. Say that three times fast. And she was lost in a storm. Now, those bare minimum facts don't pay service to the events that surrounded her sinking. This was a ship that was known as a Christmas tree ship, and there were several of them. And what these ships would do is during the November season, which is actually the worst time to sail the Great Lakes because of all the gales, all the winter storms that just take, and make mass chaos on the Great Lakes. Captain Herman Schumann took it upon himself as one of the part owners. There's three owners of the Ross Simmons. There was Captain Herman Schumann. There was his brother, who was actually he died when the Christmas ship, the Thal, sank. And then there was another owner who owned like 3/4 of the stock. So Captain Santa, or Captain Herman Schumann, as he was called both, would take it upon himself to go up to the ports in the UP of Michigan, along the upper part of the northern tip of Michigan. So if this is the thumb area, we're looking at this area right here, that he would go and get different kinds of Christmas trees to bring back to different ports along the Wisconsin and Chicago border. And he would sell these trees for a very cheap price. Normally between 50 cents and $1, which is like unheard of in our, day. It's just we haven't bought a Christmas tree in years, but I think they bare minimum go for like $24 or $25 around here. So in order to cut out the middleman and to keep the prices as cheap as possible, uh, Captain Santa would put a Christmas tree on the highest masts, and he would decorate a sign and Christmas lights saying, "Christmas tree ship, my prices are the cheapest." And he would sail into ports, and he would often sell these trees, 50 cents each, $1, or maybe possibly give them away to local families who probably couldn't afford anything more than a Christmas tree to put up. And so he had been doing this for quite some time. But on the last sailing of the Christmas tree ship, the Ross Simmons, which was in 1912, they left Thompson, Michigan, loaded down with quite a lot of trees. I believe the number was about 5,500 Christmas trees that were bundled and strapped to the deck of the ship. So the ship was, even before they put all these Christmas trees on there, for about 2 years leading up to that, the ship kind of had a hard time keeping a crew because it was starting to become unseaworthy and had been towed into different ports on various occasions because it was sitting low in the water. So now you can imagine the ship that, under her own weight, is having a hard time staying afloat in the Great Lakes. And now she is just, every nook and cranny of her deck space is covered with huge Christmas trees. And just a small Christmas tree, we know, weighs, it usually takes a strong person to lift a small 5-foot Christmas tree. But we're looking at over 5,500 Christmas trees that were loaded onto this ship's deck. And so she was already struggling. And then they noticed, after they got all these Christmas trees loaded onto the deck, that the weather was starting to turn poorly. And by poorly, I'm talking that the winds were starting to pick up. Some rain was coming in, probably fog, and the sailors were kind of apprehensive about leaving port, because knowing the Great Lakes in November, you never know what will be a mild storm and what will suddenly become a gale forced wind and be blowing you all over the surface of Lake Michigan and possibly to the bottom of it. So the sailors were very apprehensive about going out across Lake Michigan down to Chicago. But uh, Captain Santa, Captain Herman, decided that, he sailed through some storms before, and this was going to be their last, trip across, the lake for the season. So, just bear down and let's get it done. So as they set sail, as they progressed across the lake, the weather started to become more and more serious, to the point where the trees that were strapped on deck were beginning to take motion, which is a very bad thing when you are on a ship, that you don't want it rocking back and forth in the water any more than what the waves are doing, because then you have the potential for capsizing. So at one point, uh, two crew members were sent out to check the lashings, make sure they were secure. And just as they were coming onto deck, a huge, gigantic wave broke across the ship, which loosened the last lashings and not only swept the two crew members off of the ship, but also the small boat, rowboat that was on board, and several of the Christmas trees. Now, the reason I mentioned this is it plays into another detail that we have an account of the Christmas tree ship, and that is the message in the bottle that I'll get to later. So, as the Christmas tree is struggling to make any progress across Lake Michigan, the lighthouse keepers, on the 23rd, so they set sail on the 22nd. By the 23rd, the lighthouse keepers at a lighthouse station took notice, and they could see that she was sitting very low in the water. The only problem was they did not have their life-saving ship available to them, because it had already left for the day to go take care of some other issues that were happening, because there's other ships that were in distress due to the storm. So the best that the keeper at that time could do was notify the next nearest lighthouse station, which was there at Two Rivers, Wisconsin, and hope that they could get some type of aid out to the crew of the Russ Simmons before she sank beneath the waves. Now, they were able to view her through a looking glass, but eventually a fog settled in, and by the time that the keepers and the life-saving crew station launched a rescue effort from Two Rivers, Wisconsin, by the time they got to the vicinity of where the Russ Simmons was last seen, there was no ship to be saved. She was completely gone. And so they theorized that that she sank, and they were finding, some Christmas trees um, floating about here and there, and so that kind of told them that something had happened and that the ship had gone down. Now, I'm going to take a sip of water. This is where the message in the bottle comes into play, because a lot of times, sadly enough, the last message that any crew could possibly get out was a message that they might put in a glass bottle and seal it with a cork and cast it out into the waves, and hope that at some point this bottle, with their last, message to anyone um, that they would wish to contact, would make shore. either washing up on a sandy beach or some rock outcroppings, and hoping whoever found the bottle would contact the authorities and relay their message. So the message that was in the bottle was, Friday, everybody, goodbye. I guess we are all through. During the night, the small boat washed overboard. We are leaking bad. Now, the names of the two crew members who were swept overboard were Steve and Invald. It says that they were lost too. And then it said, God bless us. So finding the message in the bottle, that pretty much meant that the crew had and the ship had succumbed to the storm and were sank. And seeing as they could not find the ship above the water, floating around anywhere, this pretty much sealed their fate, and everybody pretty much knew that they were gone. And then wreckage from the boat and Christmas trees started washing more and more on shore. Now, around December 23rd, about 12 years later, on December 23rd, 1924, an odd thing happens. A fishing trawler is hauling in its nets, and somebody spots a uh, leather object in the net. So they get it out and they open it and they find that it is Captain Herman's wallet that's been wrapped in oilskin, and that's what preserved it for so long. And so the last remains that the lake gives up are the Christmas trees, some wreckage, and eventually the captain's wallet. And so we now know that, the Christmas tree, she was bound for Chicago, but she met her fate in the gales, a gale storm, and she never made it into port. Um, and it's, the story has a lot of tragic parts to it, because the people who are waiting in Chicago, in hopes that the Christmas tree ship was bringing in a load of Christmas trees, um, the realization of when people along the Wisconsin coast were finding these Christmas trees floating up on the shore, that was kind of a sad uh, discovery, because that meant that one of the Christmas tree ships had gone down, and it happened to be everybody's favorite, which was the Ralph Simmons and Captain Santa, Captain Herman Schumann. So that is the um, tragic sinking and final story of the voyage of the Ross Simmons. Now, in celebration and remembrance of everything that the Christmas trees ships tried to provide, because they were just providing Christmas trees, they were bringing with them like the Christmas spirit and generosity and hope. And seeing these ships sailing into port was a celebration, because it meant the coming of the Christmas season to a lot of people. And so, in remembrance of that, for a long time, the Coast Guard cutter Mackinac would make a Christmas tree run to Chicago, and they would deliver Christmas trees to the less fortunate. And so, um, that had become a celebration. Now, in 1971, I believe, a scuba diver by the name of Gordon Kent Bell Richard found the final wreckage of the ship, sitting off the coast of Two Rivers, Wisconsin. He actually was looking for a different ship and found a sizable item being picked up by sonar on his machine. And so they went down and they actually found that it was the Rose Simmons. So now we do know where her final resting spot is. People, apparently go scuba diving on it. It's become a scuba diving spot. I don't scuba dive yet, so I haven't gone down to see her, but we do know that her final resting place is right there off of Two Rivers, Wisconsin. Now, the reason people say that she's a ghost ship, it ties in with that people have seen a ship matching her description on nights that are becoming foggy and stormy. And at least one report that I found reported that not only did people see the ghostly silhouette of the ship sailing in and out of the fog, but they started to smell the scent of fresh cut Christmas trees, and it being a mix of pine and spruce. It had a very strong odor to it. Now, it's said by old time sailors that when you see a Christmas or when you see a ghost ship, that is generally a omen to you to go back to land because a storm is coming and you're in its path. And if you want to avoid that circumstance, then of getting lost in a storm or being wrecked by a storm, you should probably head back to the shoreline or to port and call it good for the day or night, depending on what time you're out sailing. And most passenger ships do, when they knowingly see these ghost ships, they will turn around and go back, because not a lot of people want to take any chance with that kind of thing. So I do have some other ghost ship stories and some hoodoo ship stories that I want to talk about. The next one being probably the Great Lakes' very first ghost ship. We know that she was the first major of the Great Lakes, with it being she had to come across Lake Erie and then up Huron, across the Mackinac Straits, and then into Lake Michigan, and that is the Griffon, which was built by LaSalle. Now, the story goes that LaSalle, um, in his pursuit of not only trying to become rich, but paying off monetary debts that he had made while trying to build the Griffin, he made his way to the ports of Wisconsin along the Lake Michigan shoreline and loaded his ship with a lot of fur pelts, including buffalo, rabbit, beaver. Beaver was very sought after because of the beaver hats, beaver skin hats that people like to wear during the time. And this ship, she was custom built in the Niagara Falls area, but she wasn't built quite right for the Great Lakes, especially with the type of lake bottoms that we have, the type of wave anomalies that we have. So she was really, the Native Americans thought she was an atrocity as she was sailing around the Great Lakes. But once they had loaded her up, I believe she had over 12,000 pounds of uh, animal furs, possibly, some food goods, because they were half of the crew was going to then sail the Griffin back to her port of origin, which would have been over in the Niagara Falls area. So half of the crew are left on the ship, with Luke the Dane being the second mate, and now the person who is going to sail the ship back to port. And LaSalle and the rest of the crew decided that they would set up different fur trading posts along the Great Lakes, and they made plans that they would meet back at St. Joseph's, the mouth of the St. Joseph's River. Unfortunately, LaSalle and his party made it back to St. Joseph's River mouth, and they waited, and they waited, and the Griffon never showed back up. And so they started talking to the local Native American tribes, the Seneca, the Ojibwe, and they found that the last time that the griffin was actually seen was by a Seneca tribe that actually came into the same bay as the griffin, along the UP, and they were both ships were trying to wait out a storm. Now, eventually, the Native Americans, knowing the lakes, decided to take to land because, in their estimate, this was a storm that uh, had ill intentions and was sent by the Great Manitou, um, because somebody apparently had taken more than what they were allowed, and this plays into whether it's copper, whether it's fur, whether it's tobacco, grain. Um, in the Native American beliefs, the Manitou monitored all this. And if you took more than what you personally needed or than what your tribe needed, then the Manitou had every right to sink your ship. Um, so, with this in mind, yes, the Griffin was the culprit in this case. Now, we don't really know where she sank, whether it's in the northern part of Lake Michigan or if she actually made it through the Straits of Mackinac and into Lake Huron. All we know is the last time she was sighted was by some Native Americans um, who were trying to take shelter in the same bay as them, and then decided to go, leave the Griffon because they probably realized that she was loaded down with furs, and this was probably what was causing the storm in the first place. So what actually happened to the Griffin, we don't know. Where her final resting spot is, she's still being looked for to this day, even to the point where Josh Gates, with his different uh, Expedition Unknown shows, has actually gone and looked for the Griffin, but was not successful in finding her. Now, the next ship that I want to talk about is, I call it a ghost ship because of the fact that there are still human remains on the actual ship itself. Now, this ship is called the SS Kamloops, and she actually rests in her final resting place is in Lake Superior, and she is close by Isle Royale. That much we know. It's really not known why she sank. We do know that there was a passenger steamer that was moving alongside of her, and this ship was called the Kudak. Now, at one point before they lost sight of the Kamloops, the Kudak's radars picked up a giant object raising up out of the water in front of them. So, in theory, that could have been the Kamloops crashing into a shoal or a rocky outcropping and her raising up and then sinking to the bottom. What we do know is the Kudak was able to make it to Fort William, and the Kamloops did not. Now, scuba divers have found the Kamloops, and they do go down periodically with the permission of the government, the local authorities, to see what kind of preservation, if need be, needs to be done for the Kamloops, because this is a human burial site now. Now, the first scuba diver who went down and explored the wreck reported back that there were human remains left on the ship. But nobody wanted to take him seriously because what he reported back was there was a ghost that follows you around the ship. And this ghost has since been seen by various scuba divers who have gone down to the wreck, and they call him Grandpa or Old Whitey. But because of the very icy temperatures of the waters of Lake Superior, the body has never bloated, and it does not decay. It stays in a state of preservation. And this is because of those icy temperatures. So as divers swim through the wreckage of the Kamloops, the wake that they cause actually causes this body to move around the ship. And so it looks like the remains are following them, but really it's just the wake that they create as they swim through. But as far as we know, Grandpa is still down there, and we don't really know which member of the crew he was. We do know that some of the crew members who were able to escape the ship before it sank made it to Isle Royale, but then they froze to death during the winter months. So really nobody made it off of the Kamloops and survived, not for very long. So somebody just asked for some pictures, and I will, let's see, where is that? Okay, there's the share button. So photo, gallery. So this is a picture, an old black and white picture of the Kamloops. And let's see. Now I do have, we don't know if it's an exact replica. Come on. I do have a model that someone created of what is interpreted as being what the Le Griffon may have looked like during its actual sailing period. So that is a artist replica of what they assume the Griffon looked like. So the next that I'm going to talk about is history surrounding it. It's actually part of its legend is because of where it was presumably abandoned at, and that was along the Marysburg vortex in Lake Ontario, which is very similar to the Devil's Triangle that's reported to be in Lake Michigan, that runs from Ludington, Michigan, over to Minnetonka, Wisconsin, and then down to Benton Harbor, Michigan, and then it completes itself by running a straight line back up to Ludington. So each one of the Great Lakes actually does have a Devil's Triangle of its own. But on this particular occasion, this ship, the Bavaria, was her story is tied into the Marysburg vortex, which is in Lake Ontario. Okay. Now the Bavaria, it said that when she left port, she was, there were several other ships that could see her, and they were monitoring her. That was the Kamloops that I just showed you, had the ghost of Grandpa. That was the first black and white ship that I put up. So the Bavaria, she was within sight of other ships when she went into a fog bank. And then she went missing or was lost. Now, for several days, nobody heard anything from the crew. Nobody knew what was going on. And so everybody was out looking for the ship. Now, eventually, the ship, the Armenia and her crew do happen upon the Bavaria, and they enter on board. And at the time, there's nothing that they see that makes the ship look unseaworthy. There was a small couple of inches of water below decks, but nothing that would sink it. But the ship was completely devoid of human life. The only thing that they found was there was a live canary that was in its cage that was singing in the crew's quarters. There was fresh baked bread that was still warm to the touch that was in the galley. And in the captain's quarters, they found not only the ship's papers, but also the cash box, which would have allowed the captain to pay the crew and to buy any supplies that were needed or to do any financial transactions needed for the ship. All these things were still on the boat. And so the question was, where did the crew of the Bavaria go? Now, some reports say that another ship picked up the crew, and the crew reported that they thought that they were taking on water, so they abandoned ship. But the crew of the Armenia disproved this by saying no, there was barely any water in the ship, and she was still very much seaworthy. So there is some different stories that go along with it, but it's said that ships that there is a ship that's very similar in appearance to the Bavaria at that time. Uh, People occasionally see floating in and out of the fog banks, and when they try to contact her or see if she's in distress, the ship simply vanishes, and no one is ever able to actually catch up to the ship and see what is wrong with it. See if there's any crew members who are in distress or anybody who needs saving. They just simply cannot catch the up to the ship, and it disappears before they can get close to it. So I'm going to put up the picture of the next ship, which is called the Benenberg. And oh, okay, where? Okay. So this is a picture of the SS Benenakburn. Now, this ship is one of our Flying Dutchmen of the Great Lakes, because it's been reported that when people see her or when other ships' crews see this ship, it's always because it's trying to prevent a tragedy. Now, what we do know about the Bannockburn is that uh, she was seen leaving port, and she was captained and crewed by a very young crew from the ages of 16 to 24. This is a very young crew, but at that time, uh, the younger the person, the cheaper they could pay them, and that was acceptable during those times. Now, the ship was spotted by several different ship captains as she was making her way across the lake, and the odd thing was is they would see her, and then she'd disappear into some fog, and then a minute or so later they could see her, and then finally she just was not viewable anymore. Um, she was completely gone, and some of the ship captains questioned this. But with the fog and the mirage effect that Lake Superior sometimes has, they kind of dismissed it as okay, possibly she's cloaked in the fog, or we're just seeing a mirage image and she's somewhere else out on the lake. Um, because a lot of the older captains knew that this ship was being piloted by basically a crew of teenagers and an adult, which kind of red flagged for some of the older captains, but apparently was okay within the shipping standards at the time. So what we do know is the Bannockburn sank somewhere in Lake Superior. Where she sank, we are not still have not found the wreckage. But what we do know is that at least on one occasion, the ghost ship, the ghost version of the Beninock Burn, has been sighted. And this actually happened to the steamer ship, the William A. Hutchinson. Now, as it would happen, the Hutchinson was trying to make its way across uh, Lake Superior, going up to the Ontario area, which is the Fort William for Fort Williams. And as they were trying to make their way, a huge storm came along, and the captain decided he wanted to very much play it safe because he didn't want to lose his steamer to the storm. So they decided that they would try to sail the steamer ship closer to the shoreline, hoping that if they did get, stuck in the trough of the waves or something went, wrong, that at least the crew could possibly abandon ship and in uh, the life rafts try to make it to shore. Um, so he was trying to do his due diligence of being safe and protecting his their journey along the shallower waters of Lake Superior. All of a sudden, this uh, huge ship is coming right for them. Now, we know that the Beninock Burn was 245 feet long. So this is quite a massive ship coming at the steamer ship, the Hutchinson. And so the captain of the Hutchinson, he signals for, that, hey, we're here, you're going to strike us. Nothing's working. So as a last attempt to save his ship now, he veers it out into Lake Superior. And as he does so, he creates enough passing room so that this ship that is barreling down on them can pass by. Now, it's said that in different reports that that was the last that they saw of that ship, but I found additional reports that say that as soon as the captain of the Hutchinson came back, into the shallow waters and was trying to follow the shoreline into Fort Williams, once again, this huge ship came looming down on them. And the captain and the crew of the Hutchinson knew that there was no way that this ship could have come past them, gone out into the lake, and came back around and made a direct line towards them on their now path without them seeing it. It was just impossible. So once again, this big ship is bearing down on them. Once again, the captain of the Hutchinson veers it out into the lake. And this time, as the ship passes by, the captain of the Hutchinson and the crew are kind of agitated because how dare this other crew do this again? They're putting their lives at risk. So this time they want to, make a visual of the ship so that when they get into the port, they can report it and bring it up to the authorities, or tell other ship captains and crews, hey, these crazy guys on this ship are out to harm everyone. But as the ship passes by, they realize it's the Beninock Burn, and all of them knew that the Beninock Burn had sank and went missing years before. So now they're being passed by this ghost ship. And as the crew of the Hutchinson watches on in disbelief, the Badenoch Burn disappears as they pass it into a cloud of fog. And then they hear what they interpret as an explosion. And what they assume was the Badenoch Burn crashing into rocky outcroppings. Now, some people wonder why um, the Badenoch Burn was bearing down and kept on coming towards the steamer ship, the Walter A. Hutchinson. And it just so happens that when the Badenoch Burn supposedly chased them off their course, they actually uh, made them avoid crashing into the same rocky outcroppings. And so it's reported that the crew of the Hutchinson then was very grateful for the ghost ship coming along. And um, they made it into port, and they reported their story of how the Bananock bird had chased them off of their course, but then the ghost ship played out its own wrecking and they were able to see it. So we don't really know if that's what actually happened to the Bananock burn. It is reported that uh, the year that she went missing, when they closed the Sioux locks that year, which they do, they close the Sioux locks at the end of the shipping season, and then they raise the beds of the locks up, and then they clean them. They did find the whole plate for the cam loops on the bed of one of the locks. So with that whole plate missing, if she did crash into any type of rock outcroppings, then the most vulnerable spot on the boat was hitting directly into jagged rocks. And without that whole plate there was nothing to protect it. So we can only assume that she did meet her fate in a way similar to what the crew of the Hutchinson reported, and that was that she crashed into rocks and then sank, uh, and there was nothing they could do to save her. So that is the one of the Flying Dutchmen of the Great Lakes, the Bananock burn. Now, the next two ships I'm going to talk about, they actually play into each other's history. And some old time mariners say that they were destined to meet because one becomes a shipwreck and one becomes a ghost ship, but it's a living ghost ship, but they are both hoodoo ships in their own right. So first we have the tale of the Augusta. Now, the Augusta was one of the ships involved in this disaster. The other one is the Lady Elgin. Now, unfortunately, as the Augusta was sailing with no lights, which meant uh, no one could see her. She didn't have any lights on, and it's basically like driving on the road at night without your headlights on a dirt road. Nobody knows you're there until you run into them or they run into you. So now the Augusta, she's sailing along, and the second mate sees that the Lady Elgin is about 30 minutes in front of them. And so he proceeds to wait 20 minutes too late to make the right decision. So when he finally does decide to make a decision and to turn the boat, instead of turning the boat, the Augusta, away from the Lady Elgin, he turns it right into her. And the Augusta proceeds to tear right through the Lady Elgin. Unfortunately, on the Lady Elgin, there were people sleeping in the cabins who weren't even aware of the impending danger. Now, at this point, the second mate has gotten the captain, and they survey the damage, and the crew and the captain of the Augusta believe that their ship is damaged more, so they proceed to sail off, not even offering any maritime aid to the ship that they just destroyed, which was the Lady Elgin. So as they sail off, the passengers and the crew of the Lady Elgin are left pretty much to their fate in a now brewing storm on Lake Michigan, which just makes everything that much worse. So at first, in an attempt to save themselves, the people aboard the Lady Elgin were throwing everything overboard that was of no use, which included they had about 50 cows on board. And so they pushed the cows off the ship. Unfortunately, because of the rip tides in the storm, most of the cows end up dying. So then the rest of the stuff going off of the ship, soon the crew and passengers realize we probably could have used that stuff and we need that stuff. So they start jumping overboard, trying to grab this wreckage in hopes that it will float them to shore and possibly save their lives. So it's really tragic because almost 700 people went overboard uh, um, after this ship was crashed into. And out of those 700 people, only 385 of them um, were drowned. The rest were able to make it into shore, and they were holding on to whatever they could. It's even reported that a member of the band was floating on top of the bass drum and paddling his way into shore. And people from the nearby towns were coming out to rescue them, and but it was just too much. Now, when the Augusta actually makes it into the port, the next port, the captain and the second mate are arrested immediately because reports have reached the next town that the Augusta pretty much sailed right through the Lady Elgin and caused a shipwreck, and it killed 385 people and lots of damage, not just to the humans who were able to make it to shore, but all of their belongings, everything on the ship. The Lady Elgin ends up sinking. So the captain of the Augusta and the second mate are arrested. And at this point, the Augusta is kind of a hated ship. And from then on, no captain can bring the Augusta into port anywhere in Wisconsin or Chicago, anywhere in the Great Lakes, because even though they repaint the ship several times, they rename the ship the Colonial Cook. Everybody knows the ship, her captain and second mate and crew, and they don't want it in their port. So they end up chasing them off of the Great Lakes. And so the ship ends up sailing along the Atlantic coast for several years before she comes back into Lake Erie. And they're trying to make a profession with her on Lake Erie. Um, the only problem is they can't actually get a crew to stay on the ship of the Augusta because all the new crew members start to report hearing people banging on the sides of the ship from below the waterline, or hearing people screaming for help, or they're standing next to the sides of the ship and they're hearing people's fingernails scratch against the hull of the ship. And this becomes too much for many of the crew, and they all end up uh, just quitting, jumping ship. They don't want to be anywhere near the ship. So finally, the Augusta does meet her fate, and she ends up uh, sinking there in Lake Erie, and there's no attempt made to save her. Now, the captain who was uh, captain of the Augusta ends up being a captain of a new boat called the Mojave, and he sails the ship for a period of time. People do know who he is, but this ship also meets its end because it ends up uh, wrecking itself. And the strange thing is it wrecks right on the spot where the Lady Elgin that the Augusta destroyed. It wrecks on the same spot on the 4-year anniversary of the sinking of the Lady Elgin. And at this time, the captain of that captain both the Augusta and the current ship, the Mojave, he goes down with the ship. Now, the Lady Elgin was not without her problems either. A lot of people thought she was cursed to begin with because her engine and a bunch of uh, parts that went into the Lady Elgin came off of a slave trading ship called the Cleopatra. So a lot of sailors believe that she was cursed, and she was cursed once this the slave ship's engine was put into her. And so a lot of people think that the Augusta and the Lady Elgin were drawn towards each other, and due to human error and the weather and the ship's history themselves, they were destined to meet that night. And the the Lady Elgin sinks. There's a loss of 385 lives, but then the Augusta and her captain are cursed after that. And actually, the people who the captain of the Augusta left to die haunt that ship, the Augusta, and claw at it and bang at it and cry for help. And that's why it was said to be a ghost ship before it actually sank. And because the ghosts of the people who met their tragic end due to that ship were now attached to the Augusta. So I think I do have pictures. So this is a picture of the paddle ship, the Lady Elgin. And then I do have one of the Augusta. And this is the Augusta. Now, a lot of these shipwrecks ended up becoming ghost wrecks happened before modern times because of the fact that they did not have the modern navigational equipment that we do in these days. And actually, the Augusta played a major part in bringing about maritime laws that stated that any ship sailing on the Great Lakes has to have lights on it. You have to be visible at night to other nautical, ships, lighthouses, Coast Guard, life saving stations, so that they know where you are. And if you're on, the same path, they can visually see you and correct course, or they can pick you up on their ship's, navigational system, so that we don't have the tragedies today that we had back in the 17 and 1800s, which is when a lot of our, up until the early 1950s, even into 1970, when the Fitzgerald sank, the navigational equipment was still in its infancy, and people, captains were still learning about the different shoals on the lake bottoms, the different weather that can come up on the Great Lakes, and the different wave activity that happens that can, create really strange wave patterns, with the waves, some of them, coming a quarter mile in sea, but then sweeping all the way back out into the ocean, and so, or into the lakes, which causes a huge drop, where ships are left stranded until the water returns to normal. So these are things that all of the different maritime captains of the major freighters and passenger ships have to take into account. And even like when we have the Tall Ship Festival, if people are coming from outside of the Great Lakes territories, and they're wanting to sail and do all the different ports of calls in the, along the Great Lakes, they have to hire a captain who has experience on the Great Lakes to navigate their ships in and out of the different ports, so that they are not wrecking and running, around or into shoals, hitting other shipwrecks that we're trying to preserve as underwater sanctuaries. And so it's very important to know their way around the Great Lakes. Let's see, trying to see if so I think we have a little bit more time. I do want to open it up at the end for questions if anybody has them. I do have a few more ships to discuss, and hopefully we have time for that. Now, the next ship I want to discuss is called the SS Asia. Now, there is within uh, maritime folklore a curse about having ships that start with the letter A or end with the letter A. This is supposed to be a very big no-no when you're naming a ship. Now, this goes back to old maritime legends and sailors, but it said that to give a ship a name starting with the letter A or ending with the letter A is bad luck. But to give a ship a name that both begins with the letter A and ends with the letter A, you've just cursed the ship. And so the SS Asia is such a case. Now, this ship was 136 feet long. And on the night that she wrecked, out of 123 people, only 2 passengers were left alive because they were able to huddle down into the bottom of a lifeboat, and the waves actually were gracious enough to bring it ashore. But on September 14th, uh, um, in the year of 1882, this ship it was a passenger freight ship, but it began to quickly sink near what's called Lonely Island in Georgian Bay. Now, it did have lifeboats, but back in that time period, lifeboats were your very last resort because a lot of them were not built to withstand a gale force storm on the Great Lakes. Unfortunately, most of the time the waves were breaking the lifeboat up faster than it was breaking up the ship that they were trying to escape from. And so the passengers and crew, they made it onto the lifeboats, but then the lifeboats kept capsizing. And unfortunately, this just left a man and a woman left alive who were huddled down into the lifeboat. Now it eventually makes landfall, and they are rescued within a couple of days by some passerbys. But the reason that this is a ghost ship is that fishermen in the area of Lonely Island on Georgian Bay still to this day report that if it's starting to get towards dusk and they are too close to that island, they start hearing people crying and calling for help. And no matter how much of a search effort is made, they never find any living humans making these calls for help. It's thought that the residual people who were being lost to these capsizing lifeboats, that this is their last attempt at making contact, and unfortunately, they've already gone into the hereafter. And so there again, we see where the maritime legends, folklores, superstitions play a part in the history of a ship and how it sank. Now, I think I have a picture of the Asia. Okay, so this is a picture of the Asia. Now you can see that she kind of has an interesting build. She's very tall, but she is actually very narrow. And this did not lend itself very well to a ship being able to survive the really harsh waves that one of our storms on the Great Lakes can produce. Pretty much, if the wind's hitting the top of the ship coming from the left and the waves are hitting coming from the right, you're looking at a situation where the ship just can go on its side, and once it goes on its side and starts sticking on water, it's very hard one to get above decks to where you can potentially rescue yourself, and two, to actually launch any type of lifeboats to actually be able to get into those lifeboats and make it to any type of land. So the next ship that we have is called the SV Hunter Savage. And this ship, it sank on August 22nd, 1899. 15 people were lost as the schooner capsized in a gale storm on Lake Huron. Now, the sad thing is that on this particular trip, not only was the captain and crew aboard, but the captain's wife and child were on board, and the ship's owner's wife, who was good friends with the captain's wife, uh, and her small child were also on board. So they were down in the captain's quarters. And unfortunately, when the ship capsized, they became trapped in the ship. Now, the captain of the Hunter Savage desperately tried to rescue them. Unfortunately, nobody that got onto the lifeboat thought to grab an axe or anything that could break into the hull of the ship. And for days afterwards, the captain was trying to get any fishermen, any other boat crew to take him out to the shipwreck in hopes of rescuing his wife, his child, the owner's, the owner of the ship's wife and child. And when he finally does convince somebody to go, take him back out there, the ship that had, capsized was no longer visible and had sank under the water and had been lost. So they think that the ghosts of both of the wives and both of the children still remain with the ship. And occasionally when people are sailing past that area, or when they are fishing in the area, they sometimes hear what sounds like banging on wood. And it said that this is the ghosts of the wives and the children banging on the hull of the ship in hopes that somebody will come and rescue them. Unfortunately, the ship has sank underneath the water, and uh, that is no longer possible. So now those are our there's a whole list of ghost ships that are on the Great Lakes and have different stories attributed to them. Usually, because of time constraints, I try to pick the ones that have a lot of different aspects to them. And so I'm trying to read the messages that are being posted. So I picked those ones first, but because of tomorrow being November 10th and the day that we honor all lives lost on the Great Lakes, I will read my list of other ghost ships that do still sail the Great Lakes: the Hamilton, the Scourge, the South America, the Chicora, the Hudson, the Ella Ellenwood, the French Yaw, the Lambton, the Reliant, the Gray Ghost, the William Sanderson, the Elaine Spray, the Orphan Boy, the Stephen M. Selvig, the Water Witch, the Keystone State, the City of Detroit, the Eclipse, the Celtic, the Kate L. Bruce, the Wells Burt, the E.W. Ugelbay, the Aldock, the Marine City, the Jamestown, the SS Russia, and the Jane Miller. Now, that is a list of ghost ship references to ships that have sank on the Great Lakes that have been lost. And so I always tell people, if you're interested in finding out more about ghost ships or in a particular ship that I've talked about, there are many books that have been written about these ships. Google is a good place to find more information. Historical societies, lighthouse museums are good sources for finding artifacts from some of these wrecks. And so if anybody wants more information, I always tell people to feel free to research it and find your own discoveries, because you might find another piece of the puzzle in wherever you go and research that possibly nobody else has found. So I always tell people to go and research if they want more information. uh, yes, ask your local librarians, because there are several great books out there about shipwrecks of the Great Lakes. Some of them are dedicated just to a single ship, like Edmund Fitzgerald or the Lady Elgin, the Eastland. Uh, but there are also ships that are about, a lot of the, different storms that came and overtook these ships and caused the shipwrecks, and talk about, just a lot of these major storms. um, they weren't just storms, they were events. Particularly like the Alpena storm that took down the side battleship, the Alpena. There were 90 other ships that were lost that day on Lake Michigan when this gale force blizzard came through, and people, left out of port on a 70-degree day, thinking it was wonderful, beautiful weather, until nighttime hit and the temperatures started to drop. And by midnight, they were faced with a gale force storm and a blizzard on top of that. So, due to maritime law, anything that has gone down with the ship, whether it's um, human remains, whether it is items of value, those are to remain on the lake bottom, because the families that are left, whose loved ones have died and gone down with the ships, that is a show of respect to them. Because if a human has gone down with the ship and has died, that is now um, a essential graveyard. And just like people can't go digging in graveyards, in this day and age, and taking whatever they want, you can't do that on shipwrecks either, because it is a sacred space, and these are to be preserved. So there's actually a ship that went down that had over 200 Nash automobiles in its hold. Those automobiles are still in that ship's hold and will be there for the rest of time, because they went down with the ship. They will stay with the ship. I think we've entered into the question and answer period. So I would love to see people's questions, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability.
An earlier question from Darcy was asking
Okay.
about the size or how deep the ship that was captained by Captain or had the grandpa ghost on it.
Okay. The Kamloops, the SS Kamloops. So it is resting on the lake's bottom. I believe it is in over 400 feet of water. So it's not really for recreational diving. And because there is a human remain on the ship, just like there is with the Fitzgerald, these are wrecks. The only time scuba divers really go down is to check on the ship itself, make sure nobody is stealing any artifacts off the ship, and make sure that nothing's broken off of the ship and gone into any shipping lanes that might cause a problem for freighters or other vehicles that are crossing the Great Lakes.
Darcy also asked, if I can find it, how recently any of sightings of any of these ghost ships have been.
So I would say even though it's not a ghost ship, the Edmund Fitzgerald would be one of the most recent ones. And the shipwreck site itself is not haunted, but I have many friends who do paranormal investigations, who have gone to different locations where artifacts from the Fitzgerald are housed, and they get interesting activity. Their meters will go off. Some have picked up disembodied voices. Um, you know, ship members yelling back and forth to each other, and so there is paranormal activity associated with the Edmund Fitzgerald, but um, most of these wrecks happened in the 17 and 1800s when the navigational have available today. So there were many, many more shipwrecks, collisions, drownings, loss of lives than there are current day, because in today's day and time, it takes a lot to take a ship down. No ship is unsinkable, but you really have to be trying to take a ship down in order for something to go bad, like running into rocks, crashing it into another ship, and doing it on purpose. Because with today's navigational equipment, it's very easy to avoid, disasters like that. Wasn't so much so in the 17 and 1800s when ships were just starting to come onto the Great Lakes, and the knowledge about the Great Lakes was not that great. So the captains, were pretty much taking their lives in their own hands, thinking that they were in deep bodies of water, but that maybe you think you're the pinnacle of doom, which is this rock outcropping that's 3 miles long. And a lot of sailors were told legend of it back in the 17 and 1800s, but nobody wanted to believe them. And it was said that during stormy weather, ships would be smashed onto this pinnacle of doom, and but nobody could ever find it. Well, that was because in calm weather, with just mild waves, the rock outcropping sits about 20 feet under the water, which is easy enough for most ships to glide right over top of. But when you have storm activity and you have waves that pick you up and then a trough that slams you back down, if you're being slammed down onto this 3 mile long rock shoal, your ship's going to take damage. And now we do know that that exists because that is the Superior Shoal. And it is documented on navigational maps of Lake Superior.
Do we have any other questions that anybody has for Shitan? So Darcy would like to know if you have ever seen a ghost ship.
Well, I live in the middle of Michigan. So if this is Michigan, I live right about here, middle of the state. Now we did, when I was in my childhood, my family was very into fishing in Grand Haven, South Haven, Muskegon. There's these long cement piers that go out quite a ways into Lake Michigan. But at the time, being a child and not knowing what the different shipwrecks were, um, I don't know if I could have identified a ghost ship um, at that point in my life or not. But now, as an adult, whenever I do go investigate at different lighthouses, looking for different shipwrecks that are visible on the lake shorelines. I do kind of keep my eye out to see if I can spot anything, but as for seeing a ghost ship myself, I have not seen any of them. I think my possibilities would be greater if I were had actually a boat of my own and was going out onto the Great Lakes. Uh, but there's a little bit, part of me would love to see one, but at the same time, I don't want to see one because that means how most sailors interpret it is that is a warning of impending doom. And if your ship isn't up to whatever watercraft you're in, if that isn't up to the task of getting you to shore before the storm hits, then you're pretty much at the mercy of the lakes. And that is something that I would never want to um, do. Not even walking out on the piers during some of these storms is hazardous because you can be swept right off and go right into the lake and be smashed against the piers. So as much as I would love to see a ghost ship, if I could see it from shore, that would be wonderful. But I wouldn't want to be out in a boat on the lakes and actually see one, just because I know what that means, and I think you'd be taking a risk and a chance that's unnecessary in trying to get back before a storm hit. Now, I did just somebody else just posted a question, and uh, so I think the question was pertaining to a ship. Um,
The question is, do you
the
know
David.
anything about the Daniel J. Morrill?
Okay. I don't have any information on that ship just because it's not one that I've researched yet. I'm always doing research, so I'm always adding new information to my presentations and my books and my articles. But I have not researched that one yet. So that one will definitely go on my list.
Does anyone else have any other questions? We'll give you a moment or so to see if anybody leaves us them. You can drop them in the chat or in the Q&A down below at the bottom of your screen or in the little dots at the bottom of your screen in the mobile app. Is there a museum dedicated to these sunken ships?
Well, a lot of maritime history museums all around the country.
Your sound quality went out, and so we can't really hear you. Give it another minute.
Okay.
You've gone in and out a couple of times.
Okay. So there are a lot of museums dedicated to maritime history around the Great Lakes. There's one in Minnetonka, Wisconsin. There is one at Whitefish Point in Michigan's UP. There's one on Belle Isle called the Dossier Great Lakes Museum. There's one down in Toledo, Ohio. So there are a lot of museums that are dedicated to maritime history. In Duluth, Minnesota, there's one right there. Uh, it's right where the drawbridge is. They have a lot of artifacts. A lot of lighthouses that have either become automated or are still standing. A lot of times the keeper's quarters are turned into museums, and so you can go and take a look at how the keeper's quarters are, and you can see some of the artifacts that have been found as part of the life-saving efforts of the lighthouse keepers. For books, I am currently working on a book for the paranormal history of the Great Lakes. I do have couple of books that I've written. There's Lake Monsters and Great Lakes, Lake Monsters and Odd Creatures of the Great Lakes. Then there is Mothman and Other Flying Creatures of the Midwest. I do have I've got a book that is a children's series that is my little 7-pound miniature pincher. She goes monster hunting, and the first book is about how she tries to hunt down Bigfoot because he crashes her tea party, and she wants him to answer some questions for her. So I do have 2 more adult books, and then I have a children's book series that I've started. I'm hoping within the next year or so to have the time to sit down and write out my book on the paranormal history of the Great Lakes. I do teach a couple courses dedicated to the paranormal history, along with presentations that libraries and museums and historical societies have me come and give. But hopefully, within the next couple winter months, I'll have time to sit down and open my computer and start writing. I'll have that book out within 2021. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
We did have one other person that wanted to thank you for the webinar because Darcy, was able to, I believe Darcy is female, sorry if I am wrong, was able to watch with their sister 2 states apart. So very much enjoyed
cool.
that.
Awesome. Yay. Yeah, I tried to promote it on like all my social media so that the word would get out and you guys would get as many viewers as possible. So I hope we got a lot.
Shitan, I was also going to ask, because you did still cut out a little bit when you were explaining the different places where there are museums. If you have the opportunity to send them to me as an email, I will then be able to include that, whether it's as a post or send it to the email list for everybody that attended this evening. And then I can also include a link to Shitan's website. So if you're interested in checking out her books, you can do so. And I think
now your sound
okay, I think she is freezing, guys.
Yeah, yours just started to freeze up too. I didn't catch that last part that you had said.
I think this might be the end because we're both breaking up right now. So I think we'll wrap this up. I will simply send an email and wrap up with Shitan, so that way I can wrap up whatever I had just said, so that if you missed any of that, you'll know what's going on. If anybody has any other questions that we're not able to cover this evening or you think of, go ahead and send them to the library, whether it's on Facebook or through email or anything like that. You can do that. They will get them to me. I will see them and I can make sure I send them Shitan's way, and then that way we are able to include that in the email that we'll send out. But since we're breaking up a little bit and didn't have the best audio quality, I want to make sure that we're able to highlight those different resources so that you are able to check those out if you are interested. So, do you have anything else that you wanted to say before we close this out?
Just thank you everybody for tuning in tonight, and I hope you have a wonderful week. And please, if you have a moment tomorrow, just say a prayer of respect to lives that have been lost to maritime disasters. So thank you, and I'm happy that everybody tuned in tonight.
And I would like to take a quick moment to thank Shitan for joining us one more time, and thank you to everybody else that joined us this evening. Have a great evening. I will send out more information for you to be able to check out, and we'll see you next time.